Our next storyteller was born in China, and she enjoys everything about food. You might say, well, so do I. But I bet you don't have a collection of autographed cookbooks from top chefs now, do ya? She teaches a health and food class at Northeastern University and has produced several documentaries about contemporary Chinese culture and history, including the documentary The Gate of Heavenly Peace and Morning Sun. She loves cycling and has led her 2 teenage children on a trip on the Iron Curtain Trail from the Czech Republic to Vienna. So when she tells you I was there, believe her. Please welcome Hua Dong.
So I wasn't thinking about democracy when I moved to Beijing from my hometown in 1988 to pursue a graduate degree in international broadcasting journalism. But it was a dream come true because I was guaranteed a job after graduation with the biggest national news media in English, such as China Daily and the Radio Beijing International. And also I could get away from my parents who were watching all the time and be on my own. So the first semester was full of excitement. One of my professors who had spent years in prison during the Cultural Revolution translated the adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Moby Dick into Chinese. And we watched the presidential debate between George Bush and Michael Dukakis on the big screen in a posh hotel in Beijing, organized by the American Embassy. The Canadian ambassador to China also came to campus to set up a culture exchange center. So by the spring 1989, when I was standing in line for hours trying to get into the newly opened KFC to taste the exotic fried chicken, the air in Beijing was filled with a blanket of brown sand, the seasonal sandstorm, and also all full of hope and anticipation. I felt giddy and oblivious of all the political changes that are happening around me until the students in Peking University marched into the Tiananmen Square in mid-April in demand for free speech and free press. So Tiananmen, the gate of heavenly peace, is the gate that leads to the imperial Forbidden City at the center of Beijing. And it was where Mao stood in 1949 to announce the founding of the PRC, the People's Republic of China. So this gigantic square that's built in front of it in the 1950s is the largest public space in the world and has witnessed countless parades, mass rallies, and celebrations. So, but when the government ignored the students' demands and kind of just labeled the students as dangerous troublemakers and also the movements as stirring up turmoil, the tensions escalated. As innocent as I was, I felt I need to help correct the wrong, correct the mistake. So in late April, I joined over 1 million people in Beijing, marching the streets, protesting in front of news organizations, the very places that I wanted to work for after my graduation. I wasn't aware a student hunger strike started on the square in early May, but decided to join the massive supportive crowd that formed around the hunger striking students on the square to show my support. So in the days and nights that followed, we camped out on the square and just hoping naively that our actions could persuade the government to withdraw its denunciation of the movement. I had experienced some quite exhilarating moments, such as translating news from Chinese into English for Foreign News Corps, or collecting face masks for possible tear gas against us. But for most of the time, we were just socializing, like typical college students, talking about things like how to take TOEFL, GREs, and how to apply to universities in the US. So I didn't know that some hunger strikers were cheating by eating secretly. And some student leaders were close to mental breakdown, endangering the thousands of people on the square. But I guess that's just how history is. Instead of black and white, there are always multiple shades of gray. So on the late afternoon of June 3rd, 1989, I went back to campus and saw these long columns of tanks driving by. A classmate and I, worried about our friends who were still sitting on the square, got on our bikes and start riding. So it was a 9-mile ride to the square along this straight main thoroughfare called the Avenue of Eternal Peace, Chang'an. So racing with tanks, rolling alongside us, it really felt like a dangerous mission. It was getting dark. We could clearly see the sparks splashing from the tanks hitting the pavement. It was completely dark when we arrived at the square. Flames rolled from a tank that was stopped by the mouse portrait on the Tiananmen Gate. The crowd pushed forward, but when we heard gunshots, I was thinking that they might be rubber bullets. So I kept pushing my bikes forward and trying to get a closer look until my classmates stopped me and shouted, "Duck!" People around us suddenly just run backwards, and some of them were injured. One was shot through his palm. When we put him on the back seat of my bike and took him to a nearby hospital. So what happened next was a blur. I don't remember how we made our way back to the school on that night. But when the rumors spread that the soldiers would be stationed on campus, we just fled the city and went back home. My home was 700 miles away from Beijing, but at home, everyone believed the media's portrayal of students being as rioters, and everyone agreed with the government to strike down on those troublemakers. So upon returning to Beijing in the fall of 1989, I noticed some students were absent. I actually met one of them 20 years later. He went hiding. But on campus in the fall 1989, another student was leading us to repent publicly for what we did in the spring in order to continue our study. I went along with it. And I thought, this is what it takes to work for a national news media. So my dream of working for a news media in China crumbled, I started to prep for TOEFL and GRE and to come to the United States. So 5 years later, I find myself working with a group of stellar scholars and filmmakers in this idyllic office near a public park in Brookline. We were working on a documentary film that's titled The Gate of Heavenly Peace that recounts the drama, the heroism, the absurdity, and the tragedy that the 1989 event embodied for PBS. A passage of narration in the film resonated with me deeply. It says, when individuals stand up to power, they bring to the encounter the lessons that power has taught them and the harm that power has done them. Merely to stand up does not free us from the things. Behind every gesture of hope and courage lies a life, a society, a history. Thank you very much.